Garland. So I think what we're going to try to do is have a little bit of kind of just a running dialogue, and then we'll try to open it up for some audience questions if we have the time. So I'll just jump right in. Ray, I'm starting with you. How's your voice?
We'll see.
We chatted earlier, and there was a lot of coughing going on in the room. So this film is obviously a culmination of a lot of years of being on sets, weapons advising. You worked together with Alex on Civil War, advising on some of those weapons handling. Can you talk about how and why you chose filmmaking following your military service career, and why was this story especially important to kind of make your really first break into feature directing?
Yeah, absolutely. I did a movie called Act of Valor. That's where I was exposed to filmmaking. And what I was drawn to was very similar structure-wise. Meaning there's like multiple departments that were in charge of things, and everybody was working in concert to achieve one objective, which in their case was a film, which is similar to our to the military, but usually it's an operation that everyone's working towards. And just had nothing to do with wanting to tell a story at that point. I just started to it piqued my interest of just like how everybody came together to tell these stories. I was just amazed by it. Obviously with Elliot, as I started getting more into the industry, it just dawned on me one day that maybe, possibly, if I were to do this as a new career, that I would like to tell Elliot's story. Never in this platform, on this size, but at least just a small 30-minute documentary, a visual medium for him versus a literary medium, which is what existed at the time. So that was kind of the driver. And the why, and why I got into filmmaking. Sorry.
I'll give you a break. Alex, I wanted to talk to you about how your collaboration started with Ray. What was kind of that first initial introduction like, and what struck you about Ray's story and what he could contribute to this type of platform?
I worked with Ray on Civil War, and we got to know each other. I got to know what Ray was like as a person to an extent. Film sets are sort of crucibles, so you're in sort of close proximity, and you get a good sense of people quite quickly. Also with some of Ray's work, I observed him working with actors, and I could see in many respects he was directing. He wasn't called a director, but he was doing the kind of stuff that directors do, putting together a sequence and controlling the tone and that kind of thing. When I was in post-production of Civil War, I thought, for various reasons, but some of them are connected with Ray, occurred to me, which was to make a film that just attempted to recreate an hour and a half or an hour 40 minutes or whatever it happened to be of combat in a kind of forensically accurate way, to whatever extent that was possible. I didn't know what extent it would be possible, but that was the thought. And I contacted Ray and asked him if he had a story he wanted to tell, and he immediately said yes. I didn't know at that time he had this particular story, or that he'd harbored a desire for many, many years to tell it for such personal reasons. But when he explained it to me, I thought, okay, yeah, this is the one, and we'll do it together. And we began at that point. That was it.
Now we spoke a little bit earlier when we chatted about just the attention to detail and how important it was to tie in memory versus invention is how you coined it.
Well, yeah. Sorry.
So no. There's the part I brought up earlier was when they're collapsing back into the house and the guy falls and Will Poulter says, I thought you were hit, and you were saying this is all from memory. Why was it so important to cross-reference so many different memories to keep it as true as possible?
Well, to be honest, that wasn't the original intention. The original intention, it was sort of, it wasn't sufficiently thought out, was just to precisely recreate something. But of course, then you discover that the means of recreating it is memory, because things are not perfectly recorded, and memory is a complicated thing. It's affected by the passage of time, obviously. It's actually a subjective state, much more than we acknowledge. It's hugely affected by things like concussion or stress or trauma. So the act of collating the memories was complicated, but what I can say is that the film is faithful to memory. And we had some documentary evidence, some of which you see actually in the form of photographs of the building and the street. But we really had memories. So an instance, as you just said, Lieutenant McAdoo, in our interview with him, said, yes, no, I tripped on the way back. He was kind of embarrassed about it. He tripped on the metal door that had been blown off by the IED. He slipped because it was kind of dusty. And it's an interesting thing because it's one of those odd moments within real life that in fiction you wouldn't think to include. And as one of the guy played by Will Porter, he's still serving, so we don't use his name, but sort of helped him up, that guy smiled at him and he remembered the smile. And it was such a very, very specific detail. As much as possible, I mean really as much as possible, we were pretty rigorous about it. Ray and I sourced everything you see from some first-person account of one sort or another. Sometimes memories clashed with each other, sometimes we really had to do some unpicking or re-talk to people to really understand something. But as much as is possible, what you see is just a representation of Ray's memory and the other people that were there.
And I think from the time the first shots were fired and the first grenade comes into the room until the final Casavax, I mean, it's all real time. It almost makes it feel like it's a documentary because it is so following that timeline.
From before that, from the title.
Exactly, yeah. What was how important was it, I mean, because of that attention to detail on a timeline for tactics, training the actors in tactics, and Brian, you could talk about this as well, with the communications element of it, and how much of a real key part of this film that was.
Yeah, a lot of the heavy lifting was done by Ray and Tim Chappell, who was British infantry, who's Green Jacket. Stellar dude. And there was a 3-week boot camp, and a lot of what Ray and I talked about over a handful of years is what is void from the films that need to be there. And so there's almost like this subtle acumen that many veterans and soft guys recognize. And so we worked really hard to try to fit those in, like the connective tissue between the big shots. Along with the boot camp, like the standard gun stuff that you would expect on, say, the Pride Running and stuff like that. But a lot was done to get the guys to speak correctly. Like that's a big indication on any war movie, is like there's a cadence and inflection to radio traffic. And so we had a communication shack, that it was offset, and Ray developed this communication system where we actually communicated with the actors. So while the actors in the house, those that were able to function, we were communicating with them. I was playing the air, the talk, the Bradleys, and really kind of inducing this anxiety that I think showed up with Poulter and DeFaro.
Yeah, and then to your question about the minute, the minute by minute, kind of ticker, they were kind of on a timer, and so we took, and we had these like blocks or these plays, and so we had it on the timer, and so we had to fit every person's actions into that block of time. So they say like 5 minutes, like boom, it starts. Each actor had its own thing to do. And everything was ran like concurrently, and so them in the communication shack, they were kind of given in that time. And so that was their cue, like, okay, this character needs to do this character needs to start doing that. And so it was, you know, we rehearsed it almost down to the second, which gave us that, I think, that accuracy.
And a lot of the accuracy that came through was obviously a result of the training. You mentioned the boot camp and everything that the actors went through. How did you go about selecting the actors for this role? I mean, there's a lot of phenomenal ones in this, and B, you know, for those who had obviously no military experience, what was that training process like, getting them up to speed?
As far as the training goes, I feel like, sorry, what was the question again?
Just the actor selection process, and for those guys who were not necessarily with any military background, how that training process was.
They just had to make these gates. There's a crawl, walk, run that every military guy knows, and at a certain point, they would break off into their specific specialties. Like Ray's character, DeFerro, would do his JTAC, and Mac, played by Gandolfini, he was Anglo. And so we got them to a point where they're pretty much calling close air support, which is pretty incredible. As far as how they were picked, everyone was doing it. Like, everyone showed up. Off days, everyone was there. It's pretty incredible.
Just to say something about the criteria of the casting, one element was youth. It's in the nature of the industry I work in, which is film, which is that people tend to get established as they're slightly older, they've had some successes, and so we're used to seeing military represented by people in their late 30s or early 40s because they're bankable actors by that point. Ray was quite rightly very concerned that we correctly represented the ages of the sorts of people involved, or the literal people involved. All of them were good actors, and all of them were established actors of one sort or another. The other criteria was attitude. We had to shoot this in 5 weeks, which is quite fast, or very fast actually, for a film. And they had to be helpful. They couldn't be disappearing after their trailers, they couldn't be having hissy fits about how fizzy their water was, or whatever it happened to be. So they had to be sort of can-do, up for it, and committed. And all of these lads were. And I think attitude, I'm going to speak for Ray because his voice is obviously fucked. Attitude was a really key component in this.
Did you see a lot of, growth among the cast during that process? I mean, in terms of, we talked earlier about just almost becoming like a unit among themselves, so to speak, and how you told them how much valuable this experience would be for them.
Yeah, absolutely. I won't be able to describe it. I would like to talk about like the speech you gave them about the opportunity that they had when you would go out with them.
Yeah.
You would party with them.
So
He would party.
it was like a perfect situation that resembled what Ray and I know, like at the team level. We had the senior chiefs, and then we kind of operated, Tim and I, as like LPOs. So while they were gone setting up shot list, doing the blocking, we were able to fill the gaps, like respond to their questions. How do I say this? Where do I go? What do I look like? What am I wearing? There's so many questions. There's so many details. And when they showed up bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, they thought this was going to be a fun summer, and I think they became overwhelmed when I told them about the seriousness of this and the fact that how rare it is that people would go to the effort to make a movie for one person, and when the day was going to come when Elliot was going to show up on set, everything would clear up, and it would perfect sobriety. So get your jollies in, and then it's time to work. And when they showed up on the first day at boot camp, I think they thought it was a fun game, but they slowly realized that they all really sucked at everything. and they realized, like, put the math together, like, if 3 weeks to be a Navy SEAL, it adds up really quick.
You mentioned Elliot coming on the set later in the process, and we saw photos of that in the credits, which I thought were outstanding. Seeing Cosmo interact with them as well. Aside from yourselves, aside from Elliot, what type of involvement did you have with actual military personnel influencing this film? You know, former guys you were with, or whether it be production cast or anything like that.
Yeah, just the guys that were available. They came out, and the guys that couldn't come out, they were just available by phone. Tried to give as much input to the characters or the actors as much as possible. When Elliot showed up on set, it really heightened the stakes of it to include the crew. The crew was amazing. They weren't in it for the money, and so once he showed up on set, I think it really we all had they had seen pictures of Elliot, but when he showed up, you could hear a pin drop, and so it just heightened the stakes. It made it real, more real than it was previously.
And I think, I mean, we mentioned this earlier, but sometimes there are little moments that really speak to the authenticity of someone knowing, someone who knows what they're doing is behind this. And I mentioned when I was down the 30 miles or so down the road in Fallujah, we used to have guys in gun turrets who would have dance-offs. I knew this was a moment. I knew this was a movie that was hitting the right notes the moment I saw dry humping, and so beyond the absurdity and the silliness and even those brief moments of levity, what is it that really sets this film apart from other war films that gives it that authentic voice?
I want to answer that, and then you answer it. It's right. That's what sets it apart. That you're getting something very, very unfiltered, and it's not just that there was a veteran in that position. It's also that Ray himself was incredibly honest, and all the people we interviewed, his teammates, really dug into themselves. They showed immense humility, immense honesty, talking about the most awful moment in their lives, very painful memories, lots of, you get it, right? You've just seen it. Wrongly attributed guilt, feelings of guilt everywhere. It was painful, but fascinating and rewarding. But the short answer to what you're saying is Ray. You can give a longer answer, but it's Ray.
I promise I won't, but so much effort was done to even the smallest of details, the busy work. I feel like I spent a week with Poulter and DeFaro just giving them really small things to do. How to write in their notebook, what to write in their notebook, troubleshoot your radio, buddy gear checks, your own gear checks. There's a long list of small details that it just adds up to this bigger feeling of authenticity.
So it was Ray and Shipwreck. It was.
Tim really did a good job too. Shout out to Tim.
And part of that authenticity had to come from digging into places that you, as we talked about, you didn't necessarily, whether it be you or some of the cast member or who are portrayed, it's tough bringing that out to be able to accurately portray it, just because there's that reluctance to speak about yourself or what you may have done or brag about yourself or anything like that. What was this process like, kind of breaking through that for you and some of the guys you worked with? And was it a therapeutic endeavor in terms of kind of opening up more to be able to tell that story?
Yeah, so this is a part of the decision to make the movie. I knew that I was going to face some demons. And had pushed this stuff down for a really long time. Especially in combat, like that's how you function. 3 days after this, like we were out getting after it again. So, you see someone else get shot or you see someone else get hurt, and then you compartmentalize that. And so that's just how it's a mechanism that is used to function. But at some point, that monster's going to catch you. That demon's going to catch up to you. And doing this movie, to make the decision to do it, comes with a lot of trust for the people that are going to be around me. So I needed a safety net because I was going to face some things that I think were going to be dangerous. So that trust started with Alex, knowing that he was going to help me tell it right. Because I think there's a lot of people in the industry that wouldn't really care about the details. Shipwreck being there, my friends being a part of it was important. And some of the other guys, the same thing. When you admit, oftentimes we're like our biggest critics. And when we make a mistake, those what ifs like stick with you for a really long time. And so for all of us, it was, I think, a way to, I guess, maybe seek salvation. I'll tell a story about the day where the Pharaoh was dragging Cosmo up the driveway. We got it so right that, and I had told Elliot about this event. Elliot's built like a bowling ball. He's just a heavy, big dude, power lifter type body. But when the scene was going on, Elliot started to cry. And he can't speak, so when he cries, it's got this kind of little baby sound, like an infant. And it just cracked open. And then, Alex had to take over. That's it. It was therapeutic. Allie and I, after, we texted about it, and it got to happen. I still cry about it, obviously, but it was something. We had a moment together that he didn't remember. That's it. So it's something you said, but it's something I can live with. So it was therapeutic.
And I think part of that too is why this is so recognizable to especially the veteran community from Global War on Terror. It's an hour and a half snapshot of 20 years, but the applicability is so, it permeates into so many different communities and demographics and everything, and it's identifiable. What do you hope this film, you talked about the therapeutic element for you, what do you hope it does for like the veteran community, which obviously there's all manner of ranges of struggle that have been well documented, but what do you hope that this does for some of the people who are going to watch it?
And I said this before, I guess I hope it becomes a bridge. There's the active duty member, the veteran, who's wanting to share or describe what's going on with them, but maybe they don't have the vocabulary or they don't really understand it yet. I know I didn't. Then you have the loved one who wants to know and wants to, just tell me, we've been married 15 years, why can't you tell me what you're feeling? And if this can be a bridge or to at least start, I spoke with the wife of a Marine yesterday, and she was upset and crying because her husband couldn't explain it, and she was so frustrated because they'd been married for so long. And she came to watch it, and she was like, I understand what he was trying to tell me now. And I think she was just frustrated with not being able to understand what her husband was feeling. And so I think that's like one of many examples why I did it. I mean, mainly it was for Elliot, but I knew the secondary and tertiary objectives of this was going to be that. It was going to be a voice, not the only voice, but like a voice veterans can use it as a starting point to start talking about things.
Absolutely. Well, I do want to open it up to the audience if we do have time. If anyone would like to ask questions.
Thanks.
Appreciate it. Really enjoyed this project. John Hudson with the Washington Post. A question for Ray and Alex is that at the introduction of the film, we got a little bit of insight into the message about wanting to convey the costs of war. And through the film, you can see that the unit incurs a lot of costs through the process, and the Iraqi neighborhood incurs a lot of costs as well. These types of conflicts the United States have engaged in have become much less popular wars of occupation. I wonder if is that the message that you guys were trying to send through this as a part of, obviously you've discussed how important it is for the veteran community as well. Is it a message that goes beyond the United States experience, in your viewpoint, or is it mostly a national message in general?
It's not America specific, no, absolutely not. And I think that aside from the fact there were British forces there, that is actually not strictly relevant. This is just true to combat, and it's true to conflict. And I think the messaging is a complicated thing. For me, some of the messaging would be contained in the absolute neutrality of the way the film is presented. This is a sort of bugbear for me, possibly, but I think that narratives have become required to signpost their positions as they make them, and I think it's juvenile. I think it's infantilizing, and what this film is it is information. It's very personal information. It's quite profound information. It's very sad information. It does contain information about very young men at war. It also contains information about children in a house, and it contains information about a neighborhood. And I expect adults to be able to interpret that information. That's because I'm 54, probably. Times have changed. But yeah, so is there messaging? There is a messaging in the neutrality, and it's a participation in a conversation, which is what we lack. And that's not a cop-out, by the way. That's not a cop-out. Washington Post.
I didn't say it was.
Hi, thank you. Kathy Roth-Duquet. I run Blue Star Families, which is the nation's largest military family support organization. It was a beautiful movie. I appreciate the lack of commentary and the honesty of it. I think not only for spouses, but for children. It's interesting, I was texting with my husband who left Iraq right before you guys were there in 2016 with the Marine Corps. And I think it's, the children of that, your colleagues are all college age now. And I'm interested in if there's an opportunity to have a dialogue with college students with this movie, and if perhaps our organization can be helpful in facilitating it, because I think there's a lot of bridge building that's inherent here.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why I made the movie, to create those conversations, of course.
David.
Sorry, I didn't mean to jump the gun.
No, go ahead. David Hagedorn, I'm just a guy. I don't want to ask, by the way, 5-week deadline, that was one of the best cinematic masterpieces I've ever seen in my life, so that is amazing. I don't want to ask, what was the most emotionally draining scene for you guys to capture, especially you, Mr. Mendoza. In general, what was probably the most challenging scene to film?
Yeah, I would say it's before the grenade goes off, of just the guys hanging around. I felt it was because there's like so many. There's more from a technical standpoint of establishing like eye lines and being in other rooms. It's boring. It's not anything exciting. The gun stuff was actually like the easiest part. I know some people may think that it may be difficult, but that's my bread and butter. That's like super easy. For me, as a filmmaker, was really trying to understand what he's really good at. So for me, it's I felt that was the hardest part of just having that many people in one room and then making it coherent so you can understand what's going on is really difficult to break that up in shots. And so for me, that was like, and it was great watching him do that. Do you have a difficult? What was difficult?
I can say the scenes I was most scared of. I was really worried about the immediate aftermath of the IED, and I was particularly worried about the period of time. You can imagine, 5-week shoot, and we shot the film in sequence. So we began at the beginning and we ended at the end. So in a strange way, it's like living this for 5 weeks. And as Ray very powerfully spoke about, Elliot was on set. Joe Hildebrand, played by Joe Quinn, also badly wounded, was on set. There were several other guys on set. And there was a strange blurring of lines between a film set and a real event, and people representing something and representing the horror while the real person was a few feet away. That gets particularly intense when they've gone 2 rooms deep into the hallway. There's a lot of blood and there's a lot of screaming, and it went on for a week. And I was worried about covering it, but I was also worried about the people I was working with, like Ray. I could not imagine, and Elliot, all of them, what that would be like. It was troubling. I hope this doesn't sound patronizing, I hope it just sounds empathetic. I was worried from a point of view of a duty of care, because I did not know what effect that would have. And I'm not just saying this because he's here, I'm really glad Shipwreck was there, because Shipwreck had a kind of understanding on many levels of what everybody was going through, and was a great ally to the film, but also to the people. I wouldn't say it was the most difficult, but it was the the section that alarmed me the most. And I'll just add to the lady on your right, who mentioned about children. I think it's such a good point. I'd also like to say that I say this as a civilian. Ray joined up when he was 17, joined the Navy when he was 17, became a Navy SEAL when he was 19. I think 17-year-olds make a decision to join the military when they're probably 15 or 14 and they're children. And one of the purposes of this film, I think, is to try to be honest about what combat is like. My industry has not traditionally been that honest. Not always, but quite a lot of the time has been pretty disingenuous. And so in terms of children, there's that too.
All right, we are about to wrap up. I do want to thank everybody again for coming out, and if we could give another round of applause to Ray, Brian, and Alex.